Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. All right, Bigfoot Society, we've got the privilege of talking to Alicia. Alicia is an individual that I had the privilege of meeting at my booth in Sasquatch Summerfest out there in beautiful Oak Ridge, Oregon, just a few months ago. And she has agreed to come on. She's got some really interesting things that have happened to her over the years. But Alicia, it's a privilege to talk to you again, and thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to this. It was awesome to meet you at the festival too, and it's exciting to share. You kind of helped encourage me to set the appointment and do the interview, so I'm looking forward to it. Yeah.
Absolutely, and it looked like you were making some really good connections around the fair. I noticed you were talking to all sorts of people when I was talking to lots of people myself at my booth, so that was pretty cool to see.
Yeah, it was great. I just happened to stumble upon and meet Jeff Rohn, and I was talking with Tobe Johnson quite a bit because I'm in the Cottage Grove area. So I wanted to kind of talk his ear off a little bit and hear more about the Owl Moon Lab stuff, and just met a lot of really great people.
That is fantastic. That's one of my favorite books. It's such an incredible read, and big fan of everything that Tobe and those guys do. And I've talked to Jeff as well. But that's why I'm saying people, you need to go to festivals like this, especially the smaller, newer ones, because you're going to get connections that you're not going to be able to get on the internet. But that to
Definitely.
The side, Alicia, that's kind of my plug for people to go to festivals in person.
Yeah.
It's an honor to have you on here. I'm going to go ahead and put things right over to you. But before we start, I am going to say this is going to be one of those interviews where it'll be kind of a more conversational back and forth, just because we want things to flow a certain way. And I always check with the individual to see if they'd prefer them just taking the reins and going, or if we want to have more of a conversation. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So it might be a little bit different than you're used to, but it'll be great. And Alicia, I'm going to have you go ahead and start off where you'd like to start.
Okay, sounds good. So I was born and raised in Astoria, Oregon, which is like the top left of Oregon, right at the mouth of the Columbia River there. And when I was about 9 years old, I lived with my grandparents off and on a lot in our childhood, and they decided to sell their house in town and purchased a 5-acre property out called Svinson, but it's still the Astoria zip code, but it's about 20 or 30 minutes east of Astoria off Highway 30. And we moved out there, and the first summer I was out there, I had a sleepover with a 4-H friend, and she came over and spent the night, and we stayed up later because it was a summer night, and we probably went to bed around 12 or 12:30, and I could not sleep because it was just really hot, and we didn't have AC. And she fell asleep within the first 5 minutes and was snoring. So between the heat and the snoring and probably a leftover caffeine rush, I could just not sleep for the life of me. And it wasn't very uncommon for me to just lay in bed and kind of be in my head thinking about things. And so I know I did that for about an hour and a half or so. And at one point I got so fed up with the heat that I just grabbed my pillow and decided to lay down on the carpet below the only window in my room. And I'm laying there. And I guess maybe I should kind of describe the property a little bit in the area. But So it's kind of like in the shape of a square, and it's a corner lot. So the road wrapped around like the left and top side of it. We had kind of some neighbors on our right side and kind of back behind us. But we had a lot of elk and deer and coyotes around. We were really familiar with the elk and the deer coming into our yard. And for some reason, they really like to enter in this one specific corner, um, which was like the top right corner. And it would lead from the road, and they'd have to jump over a drainage ditch into our field. Our property was pretty open, like not a ton of trees, but if on our road, because it kind of came to a T, so it didn't matter if you took a left towards our property or a right. Either way, it would end up at like a gravel road with just tons of forest, and there'd be, logging trucks coming in and out during the week. And so just a lot of forest land back there. But our property itself was pretty open. So going back to the story. So I'm laying there, and it's probably between like 1:30, 2:30 in the morning. And I hear this really loud thump. And I immediately woke up because I was like almost drifting off to sleep. And then the thud sound like woke me up. My eyes I opened wide open, and immediately after the thud, I started to hear running, and it sounded bipedal to me. And with the deer and the elk that would always come into our yard, I was familiar with the sound of them kind of entering our property, because you'd hear kind of like a first thud and a second thud, like the front hooves followed by the back hooves, and this was just like a single thud. So the thud, and then running towards the direction of the house, I kind of heard it approaching, and it probably got like halfway through the field, and I started to hear really heavy breathing. And at this point, I was kind of more like paralyzed in fear a little bit, because I was realizing that it was heading in the direction of like the house and like my open window. And even though my blinds were closed, I was just like, I guess, nervous that this thing would somehow know whatever it was, that I was on the other side of the window or something, and little paranoid thoughts. But so it booked it past my window, and it was so loud. Like the footfall was really heavy. The breathing, of course, became a lot louder. And it just kind of went right past my window. It took a single step on our gravel driveway, and then it hit the pavement. And as soon as it hit the pavement, I heard the sound of bare feet slapping on pavement. And that really kind of tripped me out, because I was like, a part of me was thinking, there's a person running through our yard in the middle of the night, which is strange on its own, but why would they not be wearing shoes, was my other thought. And then it continued running. And then there was like a short pause, followed by another thud. And then I continued hearing the running again. So it actually, I realized it ran just far enough to pass, like we had a bordering tree line behind our house, separating our property and the neighbor's property. And there was like old barbed wire in there too. So this thing, whatever it was, just ran long enough to pass that tree line, and then jumped over the ditch and continued running in our neighbor's field, which was like 3 foot tall dry grass. And I could hear it like kind of pushing down the tall grass as it was running. And the other thing about it was just how fast it covered ground. Like, I mean, I can't even really guess how long it took, but I just remember in the moment thinking like, wow, this thing is really fast, really heavy. And just had no idea. I had a hard time believing it was a person. And I didn't tell my friend or my family. I was just kind of like freaked out and wanted to forget it, sort of a thing. But that was the first experience I had at that house. And then a couple years later, I was probably like 13 or 14. And this is one that I experienced with my mom. And by this time, we had 2 dogs, and we had like a small schnauzer mix, and then kind of a medium-sized pit bull rescue. And the two of them were like, they would just bark and go running after anything on our property. Like, didn't matter if it was, big elk or the deer or people, they would just take off running. We actually had to be careful about letting them outside if we had elk in our yard and stuff like that. But my mom and I went shopping for the day, and we had probably been gone about like 5 hours, I'd say. And no one else was home. So when we got home, first thing we were like, oh, got to take the dogs out because they probably need to go. And so we let them out the back porch, and we start walking out there with them. And we noticed that they wouldn't go down off the porch. So we kind of decided to walk down off the few steps and onto this little tile paver area. And it's dark. I don't remember there being any source of light outside of like our porch light reaching as far as it did. So we couldn't see stars and, no moonlight or anything because it was pitch black beyond like the porch light. So, and as we're walking down the stairs off the porch, we're kind of talking. I think we were just resuming a conversation we were having in the car. And, we think the dogs came off the porch and are doing their thing, but we're just talking and not paying attention. And then all of a sudden in front of us, we start to hear something like trudging through the blackberry bushes, walking through them like it's no problem at all. And they'd probably be like, kind of waist height blackberry bushes. And it's, again, like heavy footsteps. And it was kind of like a boom, boom, boom sound. And my mom and I both stopped talking, and she's like, do you hear that? And, what is that? And she thought maybe it was an elk. And I was like, no, I don't hear like the hooves. And she's like, could it be a cougar? And I thought, no, I think it would, be trying to sneak up on us if it was a cougar. And it just keeps like a really steady pace of approaching us. And then as it's getting closer, I start to hear deep, heavy breathing. And I instantly think back and remember that night at the sleepover when that thing ran through our yard, and it reminded me so much of that sound, just like the heaviness of it and the breathing. And it wasn't slowing down, and it also wasn't speeding up, but it was just like beelining straight for us. And we should have been able to see it. But again, it was so dark, and the porch light only illuminated so far. And then my mom is just like, wait, where are the dogs? And because we hadn't heard a peep out of them. And we look up, and they're still on the porch. They're actually standing at the back door with their tails tucked and their hackles up, and they look terrified, which is very abnormal for them. They always freak out when something's on our property. And we were like, this is weird. So my mom just goes, get in the house. And we ran in, and she locked the door, and immediately she ran over and like closed the blinds to a window that, if it were daylight, would have been facing where that thing was walking towards us. Like we would have been able to see it had there been light, but, we couldn't. Yeah, of course it was pitch black. So it weirded me out that she closed the blinds. I mean, I think that was just kind of like a mom instinct, like protective thing. But I remember thinking, if it was an animal, why would you close the blinds? But, and that freaked us out. We didn't really talk about it too much after that, but she'll still talk about it with me and agree that that was weird. And we both kind of question, what it could have been, but I lean more towards the Bigfoot stuff, and she's open to that. But, yeah, both of those things are, I guess, still up in the air. It just didn't sound like any animal I could think of, I guess.
Was that the same property as well, or?
Yes. Yeah. Sorry. That was the same property.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. We were probably out there for like 8 years, I want to say. But yeah, and those were the two main kind of experiences we had out there. And I asked other parts of my family, like my brother lived with us, and then my grandparents, and I don't recall them sharing anything, but yeah, they were interesting.
You said it was east of Astoria?
Yeah. So if you take Highway 30 and head towards like Rainier, Oregon, and like where the bridge is going over to Longview, that out that way. I think it's about like maybe 18 or 20 miles east of Astoria. It's still considered the same zip code, but there's like a little sign that says Stinson. But yeah, it's right before Napa.
So were you close to Rainier or not too close?
I think from Stinson, Rainier probably would have been another like 35, 40 minutes. But yeah, it's from Astoria, it'd probably be more like a 45, 50-minute kind of trek.
Wow. Okay. So in terms of Bigfoot moving around, it's not that far away.
There's a lot of like forest land out there.
Oh yeah.
There's quite a bit. Yeah.
Have you heard the Rainier stuff I've had on this
yes,
podcast?
Okay. That was the first one I ever heard. And
was
that
it
one
really?
got
Man.
me hooked.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. That was one of my favorites. Yeah.
There may be more coming to that in a few years. We'll see.
Oh, cool.
Cross your fingers.
Yeah.
So thinking back to that time when you're pretty young. We just heard that you were around 13 to 14 in the last account. Did you ever notice any weird stuff on the property besides hearing the sounds, the footprints? Did you ever see like any weird things done to trees or other sounds that didn't make sense or just kind of out of place stuff?
No, I mean, so I didn't really explore much of the woods or anything out that way. And like our property, I mentioned we didn't really have a ton of trees. Other people's properties would, but ours was fairly open. In fact, I think that there were like a lot of young trees that were just planted. And I drove past that property somewhat in the last probably 3 years. And those trees have already grown. You can't even like see the house anymore as you drive by. But yeah, so I didn't notice any interesting structures or things like that. But to be honest, I don't think I would have an eye for it. It wasn't until I learned about that stuff that I like will see it anytime I'm out in the woods. But we did have a kind of a separate living room on the end of the house, or one end of the house, that was kind of like a TV family room. And the porch kind of hugged around that side of the house, but it had a ramp leading up to it. And there was a lot of summer nights that I would fall asleep with the TV on, like no volume, but leaving the TV on for kind of like light. And when I would be asleep kind of in the middle of the night, I would be woken up to the sound of someone stepping on the creaky boards of that ramp. And I would wake up and listen, and I wouldn't hear any additional like footsteps leading off or continuing onto the porch. It would just be like the creaks of specific boards that I knew myself from just walking on it. And then there would be no other sound. So that I always wondered about. But aside from that, I don't really remember much else. My brother saw a cougar at night, kind of backlit by the moonlight one night while he was out smoking on the porch. But yeah, I asked him and he didn't seem to remember any like strange non-wildlife type experiences.
Gotcha. And did that ever come up in conversations with neighbors? Like, hey, we had something weird running around on our property. Did you guys ever have anything or anything like that ever happen?
No, not that I'm aware of. I don't know if it's possible that was, conversations between my grandparents and my mom, but we only talked to about one neighbor in particular. They were on our right, and they pretty much kept to themselves, but they would let us know if there was, any sightings of cougars in the area, or, if animals, like their pets, were getting messed with by coyotes or anything. But it was mostly just kind of your typical small talk with them. And yeah, they had a couple of horses and a couple of dogs, but we didn't really, it was just kind of a simple hi neighbor sort of a thing.
Right.
Weather's nice kind of talk. Yeah.
And I totally get it. Kind of similar maybe to New England a little bit in a way, which is where I
Yeah.
grew up. But so around that time of your life, you had some interesting things happen, and you're kind of open to, well, maybe this is Bigfoot, maybe not. And
hmm
then did other things happen pretty close to that, or was it another multiple year gap between something else?
Yeah. There was probably another good gap. So like my next experience was more like when I was 21 or 22 age range. I've grown up having kind of like paranormal activity stuff, and I moved around quite a bit in my childhood. So we'd be in houses, and I'd kind of have more experiences surrounding like maybe quote unquote haunted house type of situation or things like that, but not as much in the realm of Bigfoot. So, but when I was, yeah, that age range of 21, 22, I was working in the service industry and befriended this gal and her boyfriend who I worked together with. And we decided to go camping together. And if you head down 101 from Astoria, you can go past Seaside and wind up at that junction where it splits off to either stay on 101 or take Highway 26. That'll you go over a pass and it kind of spits you out towards Beaverton area. And on that pass is a campground called Spruce Run. So we decided to go camp that way, and they brought their dog with them, but otherwise it was just the three of us. And when you first pull off of Highway 26 towards the sign for the campground, the road splits and you can go left and up towards the lake, which is called Lost Lake, or you can go to the right and go down into the campground. We wanted to go out and check out the lake, but we decided to go grab our spot first and kind of set up a little bit. So we went down and we found our camp spot. And when we were driving down in, I noticed off to the left that there was a trailhead that kind of hugged and paralleled the road of the lake, kind of drive up or whatever. And so I made a comment of that and I was like, oh, I wonder if that trail leads to the lake. Maybe we should try to hike to it. And it's probably not that long. So we decided to do that. After we set up, we walked over to the trailhead and there was no like signs at that time. So it didn't I don't even know if the trail had like a name or anything. And then there was just kind of like a blank um, sign area. But we decided to take the trek anyways. And their dog was really excited, kind of had the zoomies. He'd run up ahead of us and then come back. But then I was leading in front and, besides the dog. And every like 20 feet, probably, I was running into cobwebs. And then the trail was pretty overgrown. You could tell it wasn't really maintained. And so I remember making a comment about partway, about 5 minutes in or something that like, I don't think anyone's taken this trail recently because I'm literally walking into cobwebs, every 15 or 20 feet. And pretty soon it turns into just switchbacks. And so the dog's like running up ahead of me, kind of partially up the next switchback. And then he turns around and comes running back and he'll check in with his owners. And we get like 20 minutes into the hike. And all of a sudden, something like throws a decent sized rock up and over our heads, like this perfect arch, and it just like whacks trees all the way down. And I stop and we all look at each other and we're just kind of like, what was that? And I'm trying to kind of look up because there's a bit of like a ridge up above us. And I don't see anything, and the dog's like all perked up and curious. But I think I made a joke of, I think at that point I had heard about Bigfoots throwing rocks, and so I think I cracked a joke of like, oh, maybe it's a Bigfoot. But we were kind of puzzled, but I was curious and also wanted to continue hiking, and so I think we just decided to keep going a little farther. I think I kind of encouraged it a bit.
How did the other people in the party react to your joke?
I think they just kind of laughed a
Okay.
little bit. I mean, they'd be open-minded to chatting about subjects like that. But I don't know if they personally were, in that boat of believing in them. But yeah, I think I remember them just kind of giggling at it. And I think they were more concerned that it was a person maybe up there, like camping out, or like, maybe like a homeless person living up there. But I was like, oh, it's probably nothing, or maybe it wasn't a rock. I remember us kind of trying to talk through it of like, maybe it's not as big of a deal. But in my head, I was like curious and kind of hoping that it was a rock thrown by Bigfoot. So I was encouraging them to keep going. And we went probably, I think, like one and a half more switchbacks, and a second one was thrown. So I immediately looked up the like ridge or hillside again, and I could see where I think it came from, because this bush was kind of shaking pretty like rapidly. And I pointed it out, and they're like, oh, yeah. And I could see on their faces they were weirded out. And I mean, I was a little weirded out, but I was kind of more excited and curious than afraid. But at this point, the dog actually turned around and started descending the trail without us. Like, he wasn't having any of it. And I think at this point in the trail, we were also wanting to know like how much farther it was. And it started to seem like it was taking longer than it should, because the road leading up to it is very short. Like, it shouldn't take that long to kind of get to. But the second time that the rock was thrown, it did the same exact thing, like the same exact perfect arch. It was way up over our heads and then hit multiple trees as it came down. But when I looked up where I think that it kind of came from, you could see that that wasn't a part of the trail. Like, the switchbacks were about to stop, and like maybe it continues farther off to the right or something, because you couldn't see. It was just all overgrown. And it didn't make sense to me that a person would be hiding up there and just like throwing rocks at people. And I think at this point too, I was still running into cobwebs, maybe a little less, but there was still quite a few as we continued up there. And so we just kind of decided, okay, like something is either maybe not wanting us up there or is messing with us. And because I could tell they were a little uncomfortable and the dog was like ready to leave, we decided to go back down to the campground and drive up to the lake instead. And so we went and we did that, came back, had some food and things. And I remember when the boyfriend was taking the cooler out of the car, he was making a comment that the cooler was really heavy. And my friend, his girlfriend, was kind of laughing, like, why did you pack so much? And we were only going to be there for one night, but he's a cook. And so he got really into bringing lots of good food. And then my friend and I worked at a beer growler station. So we had like heavy 30-ounce, jars of craft beer in there, and then like the ice and all that. So it was probably like a 35-pound or so cooler when he was taking it out. And anyway, so I'm making that note because when we went to bed that night, I was woken up at some point, middle of the night, to hearing that cooler being dragged across the gravel on the ground. And it wasn't like I didn't hear any other sound of like something trying to open the cooler or scratch at it. I didn't hear any footsteps or something like scampering around the camp. It was literally just it happened 3 times. You would hear it drag across the cooler. It would pause, and then it did it again. And then there was kind of a longer pause, and then it happened one more time. And I stayed awake listening because I was like, if it's, a small animal, I think you'd hear more, or any animal, you'd hear more noises. If it was like a bear or something, you'd probably hear like sniffing or, something like that. And there was no other noise. It was literally just something and it almost reminded me of like a paranormal type experience where an inanimate object is like being moved, but you don't like hear any other noises to kind of logically explain it. It reminded me of that in a way. So, little things that were just weird enough to make you question or, yeah, wonder, I guess.
That's extremely weird.
Yeah.
I feel like we are missing some foundational information. Because you alluded to it really quick, and I don't know if you're not comfortable with this, that's fine. But what kind of stuff was also happening when you were younger?
Well, so I, like I said, I moved around a lot, and yeah, I'm totally comfortable getting into it. I just didn't know how much I should kind of keep it strictly to Bigfoot stuff, or being out in the woods. So, I remember being woken up a lot from like deeper sleeps and just having an overwhelming presence feeling in the room. I was terrified of sleeping alone and like in the dark, even if I was like sleeping with my mom, there had to be a nightlight because I would get woken up so often by like noises and not just your typical like floorboard creaking or the house settling, like wood expansion or whatever. It would sound more like tapping or knocking or it would be something that I didn't hear. It would just be an overwhelming sense of like a presence of something in the room. I'd even be kind of hyper focused on like a certain corner. But not stuff that, could probably be chalked up to, kids' fear and wild imaginations. But I woke up in my grandma's house before they sold their house and we moved out to Svinson. They had a pink house up on the hill in Astoria. And one morning, everyone was downstairs eating breakfast, and I was sleeping in. I must have been like 5 or 6 probably. But I woke up to the door just like slowly being pushed open, which wasn't something that a breeze could do because it was a really tall, like shaggy carpet, and it would require some effort to kind of push it open. And that freaked me out. I booked it and ran downstairs. And then I used to see like shadows in the corner of my eyes that I would just kind of brush off or ignore because I don't know. I think I avoided for most of my childhood trying to understand or explain things that would happen. But that's because it was like too scary for me to really try to understand or think about. I was pretty easily spooked as a kid. Like I had to be careful of what I watched and things like that because it would just kind of linger for me, or it would feel so real, even if it was just like a made up movie or something. It would feel very real. And I've also always just had a very open mind when it came to the possibility of things existing, like Bigfoot or aliens, ghosts, forest creatures, things like that. And I kind of feel like because I've had an open mind to it, that I've naturally been like approached or like exposed to experiencing more, because I don't know. And that's just like my theory on it is because if other people tell me stories or things that they believe in, I just kind of like, I listen to them and, take them by their word if they seem authentic and without judgment, and just be like, wow, I personally don't know if I believe in that specific thing, but I'm willing to hear it and hear them out and not discredit them for it. So I think a lot has to do with my just open-mindedness to the possibilities has made me experience a lot more, and that stuff really vamped up more in like my teenage years and my early to mid 20s. And I still get little things here and there, usually when I'm by myself. But yeah, just it's something I'm more used to now, and I've kind of overcome the fear and became more curious about things. And yeah, so if that kind of explains it.
Yeah, no,
I don't know.
that really makes sense. Any weird dreams or any weird communication or anything like that?
Yeah, I actually have with specifically with Bigfoot. I was debating whether I should add it or not into
Yeah.
the stories, but when I was younger, probably like between 5 and 7, I would have a reoccurring dream about a Bigfoot like watching me through a window. And it was always a square window, weirdly enough. I should probably look into like the symbology of, like dream symbolism and all that stuff. But I would always be alone, and typically in like my grandma's house would be the setting, but I'd be in the living room, like watching TV alone with nobody else home. And then suddenly I'd get the feeling that I was being watched, and I would look up, and sure enough, it would be that square window with just the shoulders and the head of a Bigfoot. And I would immediately book it to the next room over and find a hiding spot where I felt like I was out of view, and for a moment feel safe and like I wasn't seen. And then the feeling would come back around, and I'd feel it again, and I'd look up, and where on a wall there wasn't a window before, that same square window like manifested in the dream, and that same exact Bigfoot would be right there. And it was always during the daytime. I wish I could like think of or remember more details about like the face. But in my dream, I would always kind of book it as soon as I saw like the silhouette. And so I don't have much like memory of the specifics of what it looked like or anything. But yeah, and that one, I probably had that dream like 6 or 8 times, and it would just always play out the same way. Like maybe the house was a little different, but the same exact thing would happen every time. And I told my mom about it the other day, asking her, when she might think I was exposed to like the idea of Bigfoot existing, because I don't remember. I never saw Harry and the Hendersons until I was like 23. So, and of course, Bigfoot's marketed and used all over the place now. But back then, I mean, that would have been like the mid to late 90s. It wasn't as common to see that, silhouette or be exposed to the idea of Bigfoot. And, like I said, she was careful about what I would watch or see as a kid. So she couldn't think of a time when maybe I would have learned about the possibility of them. So I kind of tripped out at the thought of like, whoa, what if I was having these dreams before I even knew they existed? But I can't like confirm or deny that.
Oh, that's super super interesting. And thank you for sharing that, because that's pretty personal. Well, that's all it is. But
Yeah.
Any questions I asked you, you can shut me down. Do you have a religious background at all?
I do not. There's been times when like my mom or grandparents would attend church, like Christian churches, and I went to church a little bit as a kid, but it wasn't super enforced, and it wasn't something that stayed. And then personally, I've dabbled in a lot more like spirituality stuff, but I'm now at a point in my life where, if I kind of go through phases where I feel more connected to spirituality, and other times I don't. It kind of just depends what I do or how I'm feeling, but it's not like like a everyday thing, or I don't take it super seriously. I just kind of have a openness to the possibilities of all of it, I guess. Yeah.
When you say dabble with stuff, is it like meditation, stuff like that?
Yeah, meditation, like divination, like tarot cards and pendulums. There was a time in my 20s where I was really into that stuff, and now it's just kind of like, yeah, I know about it, and I have it, but I don't always use them, or mess with those things. I just kind of, when it feels right, or when I feel like utilizing them.
It sounds like
Mm-hmm.
you're probably a type of person where you're sensitive to different things, maybe even able to get vibes about certain people that are around you, perhaps.
Yeah, I think some of my own personal, like social anxieties or things like that, like mental health stuff, tend to get in the way of like when I'm around other people. I don't feel as sensitive to, them. I think I can pick up on, whether I think someone's being honest or authentic with me.
Yep.
But I definitely don't pick up on, I don't claim to have any specific like gifts, I guess, if that makes sense. Um, but based off of, reading about the different types, like, clairvoyance or whatever, things like that, a lot of my experiences have been audible, and I tend to hear things that other people don't. And so if anything, kind of leans more towards like the clairaudient side of things, but I don't like claim uh, any of those as a label. If Yeah.
That's really interesting. So you never have like you're around someone you don't know, and it's like, oh, I feel like I really should talk to them for some reason, and nothing like that.
Yeah, I haven't had that. I mean,
Okay.
I'll be drawn towards people if I feel like they give off good energy or good vibes, whatever you want to call it. But I tend to think like I just end up stumbling upon like being at the right place at the right time, and meeting people. Like I actually view the festival as kind of that, because that was the first time I attended one of those things, and
Yep.
I was a little nervous to get out there and, be put myself. I don't go out too much, and I've got a pretty small circle and just kind of do my thing. So getting out in the public or bigger events sometimes can, like, I can talk myself out of going, but I made myself go, and it ended up being amazing. So yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for backtracking a little bit and going over some of the foundational stuff. So
Yeah.
we were last talking about the campsite incident in your early 20s, and then
Hmm. Oh, I actually do have a little like side note
okay.
spin-off experience to that. So um, I can't remember what year that was, but so when I was around like 21, 22, and that was probably in the springtime, I want to say like late spring or early summer. But anyways, that following December, my parents were living in Central Oregon at the time in Redmond, and we went to their house around Christmas time, and my brother and I and one of my good friends at the time, we decided to go hike at Smith Rock, and we, instead of going up and over, the big rock stuff, like kind of the main trail, I forget what the actual trail name is called, but there's also, you can kind of go down to the left and just follow down along the flat canyon area. So we decided to do that one. And I was telling them the story about the rock throwing at the Spruce Run campground. And we're in like a single file line. My brother's leading, my friend's in the middle, and then I'm in the back. And at the time, no one was like around us. I think we were on a part of the trail that maybe other people weren't either at yet, or just wasn't like a high traffic time. It was just mostly felt like it was us. We didn't pass that many people. So anyways, I'm like kind of telling this story as we're walking along, and my friend in the middle just asked me, like, I can't remember how she worded it, but she was essentially asking me if I thought that there was something more to them, like intelligence or, stranger about them, something like more complex. And, you know, I immediately answered with like, yeah, definitely. Like that was kind of where I was leaning towards. And right after I said, yes, absolutely, we heard this plop right behind us, and we turn around, and this like flat, larger rock was thrown from somewhere and was just dropped perfectly centered in the path behind us. Like we had just walked through there. We knew that that rock wasn't there before, and we all heard like the plop of it landing behind us. And I turned around and saw it, and we all looked at each other, and they're like, that was weird. And we look around. I think there was to our right more of like a big rock face wall. So there was nobody, on our right. And then on our left was like a moving kind of little like ravine area. And the water was kind of loud, but on the opposite side of the running water, there is another trail, but it's a little bit farther out. And there's nothing but, like maybe knee-high rocks and sagebrush. And there was nobody over there. And we looked in front of us, behind us, and no one was around us at that time. But also, even if somebody did throw, like a human threw a rock from the other side, that water was pretty loud. And I couldn't imagine that from there that they could really hear us that well. And like the story I was telling, and just the timing of it was really interesting. So that felt almost like a confirmation to when I answered that question to her. I was like, oh, that was funny. Yeah. So that was just a little kind of spin off of that story, just the timing and everything.
It's so weird because I've had multiple interviews recently, and some of them have gotten really deep. And there have been other people that have said a similar variant of what you just said, where it's like they were saying something, and the exact second after they stopped saying it, there was some physical, like something fell or a tree was pushed over. That's a wild one.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting thing that you just mentioned, because it's something that I'm starting to hear from other people that are also very open to certain things like you are saying. So don't know if there's a connection there, but.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, just based off of my own experience, that's kind of where my head leads and what I kind of theorize. But of course, we all have our own individual experiences. During that time too, I was listening to and watching different YouTube channels where I was kind of learning more about people's encounters and things more beyond just like the flesh and blood idea of them. So that was kind of already on my mind. And it seemed like once I would learn something new and I was like exposed to a new idea or like maybe thing that people assumed that they did, like rock throwing or the tree knocking, all that stuff, it was like as soon as I had read or listened to something that talked about it, I would experience it. Or like encounter that. So, and I always lead back to the idea that, we tend to perceive things based off of what we know. It's like, if you don't know that something is a possibility or exists, it's like your brain might not pick up on that or even see it. Like you'd walk right past it, or you'd chalk it up to a bird making a noise or whatever. So, just trying to like learn and listen to more people's encounters makes me want to get out and kind of try to experience more things.
I think there's something to that, definitely. I think when you're studying different things like this, you are going to be familiar with certain things that if you had just heard a weird bird in the woods that didn't really sound like a bird, you'd probably think that's just a weird bird. But then if you're maybe familiar with Bigfoot stuff, you might be thinking some other stuff too. So I totally get it. You also had some things happen after that, correct?
Yes. It's kind of my most recent experience that I had. And again, it's a more like audible experience, but it was my first time going out with kind of the newer knowledge and ideas and possibilities about them. And after learning that, I had been wanting to go out and find an area where I could try to I like people use the word habituation. I think I learned that from listening to your podcast, but basically something like that, where I'd go and I'd try to bring gifts and see if I could, maybe stir things up. And the other thing too was the method of people going out and just talking out loud in the woods. And it felt very strange to me to like try to do that. And, I kind of laughed at myself or felt silly for doing it. But that was kind of my intention, was to go out and find a spot and try those things. And at the time I was living in Veneta. It was before I moved out to Cottage Grove. I was 29, so this was spring of 2023. And I decided to head west towards like the Siuslaw National Forest. And I was driving around for quite a while, and nothing was really, popping out, or there wasn't like the perfect turn off the area. And I wasn't really sure exactly what I was looking for. I was just kind of, winging it. And then I noticed this gate that's blocking off this cement bridge. And I noticed it was going over, the bridge was, over the Siuslaw River. So I decided to just pull out, and I was like, oh, I just want to see the water and maybe experience some like nice nature spot for a second. So I just got out and took a break and parked my car in front of the gate. And I walk around the gate and onto the bridge. And there's a bunch of like old leaf debris, pine needles, like little twigs and stuff that had fallen. And so I could tell that it wasn't like they hadn't used, I assumed it was kind of like leading towards like a logging operation road or something. But it didn't seem like anyone had driven across it for a while. And then on the opposite side was kind of some overgrown grass that maybe had old tire mark tread lines. But yeah, so I start walking on the bridge, and I get about like 5 or 6 feet in, and I hear this knock from underneath the bridge, but it sounded metallic, like something knocked on. Like the first thing that popped in my head was like the metal supportive beam underneath or something like that. And because it definitely came from below me, and it was definitely like a tin kind of knocking sound. And I stopped and listened for a second and was like, maybe that was just kind of something settling and making a noise. I don't know. So I kept walking. I stopped in the middle for a second, and then I continued towards the other end of the bridge. And just before I reached the end of the bridge, on the opposite side, I heard it again, except funny enough, it didn't sound like a perfect little knock. It sounded like something tried to slap the metal beam or whatever it was with like its finger, and like didn't hit it just right. So it was like, it didn't come out. It was like quieter, and it almost sounded like a misfire knock, if that makes sense. I don't know. Because I don't know, and maybe that was intentional the way it sounded, but it sounded to me like I could hear the like fingers smacking it, but not as, loud as they intended to, kind of thing. And then so at that point I was like, okay, that's weird, those noises. And I started to walk very quietly, like as quiet as I could, across the debris back to my car, in case, I had the idea of like, oh, maybe there's a person under there. I should maybe be conscious of that. And, I'm a girl out in the woods out here all by myself without any cell phone service. So I slowly start to walk back towards my car. And when I hit almost the end of the bridge again, it happens. And it's another more of a knock sound, but it was even quieter. So I couldn't, and at this point, I think I was recording on my phone, and I tried to pick it up, but it didn't pick up the knocking noises. And then I'm standing at my car and thinking, if it was a person that was trying to like scare me out of here, there'd probably be more noises than just the knocking. And, maybe if they were trying to really get me out of this area. And then I had the idea of like, oh, maybe those were, like knocks to tell me that I found a spot, like maybe that's what that just was. I don't know. So, and I didn't feel in danger or anything. Like, it's really peaceful out there. So I decided to just go back on the bridge and grab my phone and to lean over the edge of the bridge in the middle and to try to record with my camera, like both sides underneath, to see if somebody or something was down there. So I like really carefully grabbed my phone, just like really hoping I wasn't about to, drop it in the water. And I pan it from one side to the other and pull it back up, open my camera roll and look, and there's nothing down there. Like, there's nobody, and the water's fairly high. There's like a little bit of a ledge where somebody could stand, but it's kind of steep, so I couldn't imagine someone hiding under there without, struggling with balance. And it's kind of like that clay type soil too, so it'd be kind of slick. And I couldn't imagine how someone would be down there hanging out. And then there was a lot of overgrown brush on both sides. I'm sure you could kind of move your way down there underneath the bridge, but there was no obvious, like, even game trail leading down there. And you'd make quite a bit of noise walking around in it. There's just like a lot of crunchy leaves and little twigs on the ground. So aside from the knocks, I didn't hear anything else. So I kind of just said, okay, maybe that was confirmation that I found my spot. So I went back to my car and I grabbed some gifts, quote unquote. I just kind of brought, like, I had some old, stones or crystals that I didn't really need anymore. And I think I grabbed a couple of seashells, and then I had apples and Aussie bites, which are really good. They're kind of like a healthy snack or whatever. I just kind of grabbed things that I had at home, and I decided to set them on kind of the ledge on the side of the bridge there. And then I was like, okay, I guess now would be a good time for me to attempt to talk out loud if there's like anything out here. So I start talking out loud and I feel totally ridiculous. And I'm doing this I went back on the bridge and I'm standing in the middle of the bridge, kind of talking in the direction of my car and the road and that direction. And as I'm talking, I just kind of like introduced myself, and I was like, that I believe in them existing out here, and that, that it's hard for me to be out in the woods by myself, because I had an idea in my head of like, just be authentic. And so I was like, I'm a little bit fearful. So this is like a lot for me to come out in the woods alone. And, it just was kind of silly. I cut out that part of my recording because I can't like listen back to it. It just sounds ridiculous. But as I was talking, I just got this really strong, I guess the best I can explain it is like my whole body was just like zinging. Just like, I don't even know if I would call it like vibration or something. It just felt like my whole, almost like an adrenaline rush. And it felt like something was very close and like listening to me. And it was just all over, like my whole body just took over in this like feeling of like, I don't even know how to really describe it. I had never felt anything that strong before. And it took me off guard, and I had to kind of like take a deep breath. And I wasn't hearing anything around me. I just had that moment of feeling, that, physical sensation. And so it was also getting dark at this point. The sun wasn't fully set yet, but there's a lot of tree canopy. So as it was starting to move that direction, it got darker and darker pretty quick. And I didn't think I was ready to be in the dark in the woods by myself. So I was like, I better wrap this up. And, I'm not hearing anything. And in the moment, I didn't really take very seriously the physical sensation that I felt. I just tried to kind of move through it. And but in my recording, after I was done talking, I was trying to wrap it up, and I kind of dorkishly said, like, "Oh, like you live in a really beautiful place," and and then I took this big like sigh, like trying to calm myself down. And right after I took that big exhale, something in the woods across the road in front of my car let out what sounded to me in the moment like a really deep sigh. And it was very loud. And it completely caught me off guard because it sounded, I mean, it sounded perfectly like a sigh, almost like it mimicked my sigh. And I even heard pitch change. Like it was like a whoo, like you heard three tones change. And of course, I can't do it justice, but I was in shock. And weirdly enough, I recognized, I mean, you can't say you recognize the voice, but like, I've listened to stuff from like a lot of audio from Sasquatch, Ontario, or Mike, I can't think of his last name, but the tone of the voice or sound, I guess, it reminded me a lot like that. Like the moment I heard it, it like clicked in my brain. It was like that was one of them. And I immediately just like my stomach dropped and I was just kind of in shock. And I was like, oh crap, like that came from closer to where my car is, and I have to walk that direction, and it's getting really dark now. Like I'm scared. And so I just out loud said like, okay, like, thank you. I need to walk back to my car now. So if you could please just give me some space. And so I just like, my whole body is now shaking out of fear, and I'm like trembling, and I'm walking back to my car. And I get in the car and I lock the door and I turn on my car and I immediately just start leaving because I couldn't handle it. It was such a weird physical reaction. Like my hands were on the steering wheel and just like shaking. I couldn't calm myself down. I was like, okay, like it's okay. We're in the car. It's safe. And like realizing, you kind of asked for this. This is what we came out here to experience. But I didn't expect such a physical reaction to it. And I really didn't think about that part of this experience until I started listening to like more things on your podcast or some other people, and listening or hearing other people mention the physical reactions or responses that they get from interactions. That was a piece that I never really thought about, I guess. But that I just kind of took away from it. I had the recording and I shared it with like my mom and my sister, but of course it does not do it justice because it's so, I was on the bridge with my phone recording, and this thing, I'm not good at judging distance as far as like, how many feet away, but I was in the middle of the bridge, and then there's the gate, my car, a road, and then it was a little setback in the woods just on the other side of the car, on the other side of the road. And so it's a lot quieter, and I had to kind of try to enhance the recording. And it sounds, I called it the Siuslaw Who because in the recording it sounds almost like a who instead of a sigh. But in person, I heard like it seemed so much more drawn out, like a longer sound. And I heard the pitch tone like three times. Like it doesn't do it justice. But anyways, I have the recording of it, and it was the most intense thing I think I've experienced to date. And I've been a little too afraid to go back by myself since then, but I want to muster up the courage to go back out there because that's what I was hoping for. It's just, you just don't expect yourself, it's like until you experience something like more than you ever thought you would, it's like it just doesn't really set in that, how that can affect you, and trying to like overcome the fearful side of it and stay calm and collected, or to return even and try to experience more. So yeah, it's kind of wild.
That's absolutely wild. And it's another example of where something responded to you almost immediately, which is really, really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't think about it that way, but yeah.
Is that the audio that you had sent over to me?
Yes, it is.
Should we try to put it in? Are you okay with that?
Yeah, totally
Okay.
fine.
All right.
Maybe just like heads up to people if they have headphones on, the white noise can be a
Yeah.
little bit loud. But yeah, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, good call on that. I'm gonna play it through 3 times. It's quick, but you can always
Mhm.
rewind as well. So here we go. Man, knowing the context of that sound now is incredible. Just thinking of the
Yeah.
story you just told. Wow.
hmm It was, yeah. When I listen to that audio, I'm like, because it just doesn't do it justice. I have to like sit in my brain and think, okay, this is how it sounded in the moment. Like, remember that, because that will, just thinking about that will give me chills. And I even, I didn't have phone service out there, but I found a single bar on the drive home. I couldn't make it home before I had to call my mom. And I told her what happened. And as I was telling her, I got like emotional, which was so weird. Like it
Mm,
just popped up out of nowhere. Like I just started getting emotional. And it wasn't really the fear. It just like, I think I was in just complete shock. And it was like things I've heard, through other people that put out content or whatever. And it was like, I heard that in real life. And I think I was just in awe that happened to me. It seems like something that very few people get to hear. And yeah, I was just in shock.
it's very strange when, as humans, we, start to look for certain things. And maybe there's an old saying that has been said to me over the last few years, and maybe even you too, where it's like, be careful what you wish for.
hmm
And when things start to change and you start to experience things, it it is a thing where you get very emotional, and it is hard to deal with, especially in the moment. I had some things
Yeah.
happen out in Oak Ridge, and
hmm
it's really hard to control how you respond in that moment. So yeah, I totally get it.
Yeah. And it can take you, or yeah, it can take you off guard. And um, I think it might have even been in like Tobe's book or a interview he was saying, but someone that he went out with and they were trying to walk in the direction of a sound, and this guy he was with was typically kind of like a tough manly man, and how he just like was immediately just had so much fear rush over him almost to
Mm,
the point of tears, and he was like upset. And I
yeah.
was like, oh my gosh, I mean, I wasn't like upset, but I was just same thing. And I was like, oh, other people are experiencing like physical reactions to this. And that's just a side of it that I didn't really think about before. So it's, yeah, really interesting.
Having experienced that now, what is your viewpoint towards that area? Is it that you want to go back a lot, or you're like, meh, maybe, maybe not, or
I do. The timing was a little bit unfortunate because I just kind of started a new career. And then I moved also down to Cottage Grove. So at the time, I was only like probably, I was less than an hour away from the spot. And now I'm probably more like an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes. So it's not as easy to access like time wise and stuff for me, but I want to make a point to go back out there because I felt like, I didn't feel like I was in danger or anything. I just knew it was my own fear bubbling up to the surface. So a part of me also wanted to work on trying to, I don't know how I could do that, but other than just getting out there, but trying to work on, staying I guess, grounded and not let my emotions, take over and make me want to leave, sort of a thing. But no, I would love to go out there and continue like gifting and maybe trying to car camp overnight there. And I'm not opposed to like bringing a friend with me, or like I've been back out there since then with my mom, and I brought my sister out there one time, and we've heard some interesting stuff, but like I tend to not mention this one as much because of course it's easy to, our brains can sometimes see things or mess with us a little bit. But then one of the nights I brought my mom back out there with me, and it was dark, but there was a little bit of moonlight kind of shining through, the forest a little bit. And we're standing out there, and I'm looking in the direction of this, like I can see the outline of like this big trunked tree. And just to the right of it, I'm like squinting my eyes and looking because I notice like a shape, and I just perfectly see like this head, shoulders, and then straight down. And I'm looking and like, there's no way. Like, I think my mind's playing tricks on me, because if that is something, it is massive, like really big. And it's not that was probably less than 50 feet from us, if I was guessing. I'm not the best at that, but and so I didn't say anything to my mom. I just said, hey, can we go sit in the car for a second? Because in case it was something, I instantly just got freaked out. And then we sat in the car and listened for a bit. I calmed down, and I was like, okay, I'm going to get back out. Like, I'm fine. I've kind of recentered. And I go back to that same spot, and I look for that tree in that spot where I saw a head and shoulders. There was nothing there. It was like an open spot backlit by the moonlight. And so in that moment, I was like, okay, maybe I did see the silhouette of something there. But I can't be totally for sure if my eyes were just adjusting and playing tricks, but I was almost certain that I saw a silhouette there.
And I mean, that's the other weird thing, because it's like we get to the point where we're like, we want to see stuff like that, but then when it happens, we're like, our logic side tries to kick in really hard, and it's like, there's no way that this is actually happening. It's got to be this, or it's got to be a bear, and it gets really, really weird, the back and forth between what I call like the logical side and the Bigfoot side, which just
because it's good to keep that, but like it can become kind of a gray area sometimes.
So your mom didn't say anything, though, sounds like.
She heard some, we'd hear like stick breaks and sound like something walking around us in the woods. But she got creeped out because in the distance we actually heard barred owls. And I don't know if you've heard them go off, but they tend to almost sound a little bit like a monkey. And it sounded like babies in a nest. And I instantly knew what it was when it went off, but that freaked her out, and she's like, what is that? Like, I tried to tell her, I was like, it's okay. Like, those are barred owls. And she went and sat in the car for a minute. But she was able to like come back out and hang out for a bit. And she's fun to go and listen with. She'll just kind of be quiet and listen to all the sounds with me. And she's a fun one to go Bigfooting with.
And so this is a pretty recent thing. So this is like, now we're pretty much this all is happening current day, it sounds like.
Yeah. I think the last time I went out was maybe in May. And I just wanted to go out there and see if like the area had changed, and I have a dog now. So I brought my dog out with me, and nothing, it kind of looked the same. It looked like they were utilizing that road again, because the bridge was totally cleaned off. But the gate was still closed. And then I didn't really pick up on any noises out there. And I think that's pretty normal for the daytime. It's just kind of like the bird sounds. But no, my plan is to maybe do an overnight car camp out there if I can make it. And I'll probably bring a friend with me just so that I'm not like as easily freaked out, and try to work on that. It feels a little safer when you're camping in your car versus a tent, right? But
yeah, I think that's a smart idea too. Definitely, just to have that other person with you. Does your dog react in any weird ways when you're out there with the dog?
He'll perk up to sounds and things, but he didn't out there. He was just kind of more interested in sniffing around, and there was a moment where he was kind of looking across the other side of the bridge towards like the woods that way, and he was focused on something for a minute, and I kind of watched over there with him, but I didn't see anything and I didn't hear anything, but maybe he was picking up on stuff that I just couldn't see or hear. But yeah. Another time I've been there, I actually heard the sound. It was the daytime, just sitting on the bridge. From like almost below us, it kind of sounded like, it's a weird thing to hear, but like I literally pictured it in my head as I listened to it. It was another metallic sound, but it sounded like somebody had put rocks inside of a like metal cage kind of thing, like a, kind of a woven mesh metal cage thing, and we're just like shaking it almost like a maraca kind of thing, where you just heard like the shh, 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 but like rocks falling into each other and stuff inside of it is what it sounded like to me. I heard it 3 times, and I thought that was a peculiar kind of out of place sound. But yeah, I don't know what that was. And there weren't other people around us. We were just pretty much just us and the birds out there. So
that is very interesting. You mentioned you're down in Cottage Grove. Have you ever talked to Tobe about any places you might be able to check out down there in Cottage Grove, since he's really familiar with it?
Yeah, definitely. And Jeff too. I'm just like, my time is like tends to be limited to the weekends, and Jeff and I have actually gone out into the woods, and we haven't had too much happen. We did kind of a daytime trip out into the woods, and we did an evening, I think it was last Sunday, and it's kind of just turned into us like sharing our own personal stories and, talking about the topics. But hopefully, like, we'll get some stuff down the line. But I'm limited because I drive like a Prius, and so my car does not really handle some of the back roads that well. So I kind of either have to like hitch a ride and line it up with one of them, or with Jeff, or wait till I have kind of a 4-wheel drive option. But yeah, and I plan on making it to Tobe's putting together the Olympic Strange Days. I don't know if you've heard about that, but I'm planning to attend that as long as I can find either hitch a ride or find a rig that I could drive, because those roads get pretty gnarly. But yeah, I'm planning to get out into the woods more and kind of just dive a little deeper into all of this, because it's, when I have my free time, that's what I want to be doing.
Alicia, thank you for coming on the show and sharing what you've experienced over the last few years. Definitely keep us in the loop with what goes on in the future in this area that you found. It sounds very interesting, and there could be some really cool things that happen from it.
Yeah, definitely. I will. Hopefully, maybe in a year from now or something, I'll have plenty of activity or experiences to share with you. Thank you.
Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's a list. If you've had any encounters in Oregon, which I'm sure there's probably a few of you out there, please feel free to reach out immediately. You can use email bigfootsociety@gmail.com. A special thank you to all the Bigfoot Society Patreon and YouTube channel members. It's your support that helps keep the show going, and I extremely appreciate it. If you want to join in the fun, you can join over at patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. I'll see you there. And again, thanks for listening.
Her and I can get on here and we can tell our stories. Maybe there's somebody else out there listening that's too afraid to tell their story. Maybe this will give them the courage to come out and not feel so bad about it. Who cares what anybody thinks? I know what I saw. I know what's out there. That's all I care about.
Let people know. Please let them know. If you ever see one of these things, you need to tell. Because if you don't, then shame on you. You know? Shame on you.